Hey everybody, welcome back. Hey, as you guys know, we will work on or look at just about anything a customer sends us, and sometimes we never know what's going to come in. But in this case, we got in one that I just couldn't see doing anything with. And we get these every now and then. We get stuff come in, and our recommendation is let's don't go down that road. It'll cost more money to try and fix something than it's worth, or there's issues I can't resolve, or there's limitations, it just doesn't make any sense. There's a lot of reasons why it might not be a good idea to try and upgrade a speaker. And this is one of those cases. This speaker is the Dayton Opal Ones. And I can understand why somebody would want to send this to us hoping that we can do something with it because it looks really good. It's got a nice cabinet. It's got this black piano finish. It's got what looks like some nice little binding posts on it. Huge passive radiators on the back, long throw PRs, and a really long throw little woofer that it's got on it. Grills held on magnetically. I mean, if you just look at it from the outside, you'd think, wow, this could be a really nice speaker. What can be done with it? Can we take this and hot rod it? Take it another level. And in this case, it was just not a good candidate to do anything to. Let's dive into it. Now, when this thing first came in, Hob set it up, and he shot a frequency response measurement. And in the office where we do the design work, I'm in, and I'm at the computer on the other side of the room. And I can hear every measurement that we take. And I hear the sound of the MLS signal going, psh. And I looked over it and I said, what'd you do, hit that with about a half a watt or something? And he said, no, that was 1 watt, which it sounded like it was barely playing with 1 watt input. I said, something to the effect of, then what was the output level of that? Because it was really low, and it was. Let's throw up a frequency response measurement of this thing and take a look at it. The frequency response averaged between a range of 74 and 80 decibels. So 74 decibels at the bottom, 80 decibels at the top. There was a good, plus or minus 3 dB range there. Tweeter level's a little low, as you can see. In the mid-range there, around 300, there's a scooped out area where there's a big trough. Then there's a bit of a hump afterward. And it's just rough. But there's some things that are fixable. When there's a peak, there's ways to go in and control that and bring a peak down. It's hard to fill in a hole. In this case, where the way this woofer's playing, we could go in and put a big capacitor and shunt right there where that hole is and lift that just a little bit, but it would kill everything above it. So this woofer, and I should have taken it out to show you, it's massively built. It's got a huge ceramic magnet on it, and then a top plate, and then a group of smaller ceramic magnets stacked around it, and another plate. I didn't even really examine it to get a close look at it, but it's really designed like a miniature subwoofer, and that's pretty much what this little driver is. People are always, looking at mini monitors and saying, man, I love the sound of a mini monitor, but I wish it played down lower. And there's companies out there that have tried to take a mini monitor and force it to play down a lot lower or allow it to play down a lot lower, and there's a trade-off involved when you do that. When you trade off, or when you pursue low-end extension, you trade off sensitivity. Output levels, it's just going to come down. In this case, they went really far in that direction to gain some low-end output, but at the sacrifice of all of the output that it can do. So low-end extension, yes. Output capability, not at all. So looking at this thing, I thought, I don't know if this is going to be worth it. It's just too low a sensitivity. It's quite a trade-off. And for me to balance this out a little bit, it's going to be worse. If I take that humped up area right there that kind of crests around 700 to 1500 hertz, and I'll pull that down a little bit to try and match the bottom end. We're at 79, 78 dB max, and it's going to average 77 maybe. And guys, that's just not usable. I mean, you'd have to put a lot of power on this thing to get it up to reasonable levels, and it may not have good dynamics. So this one was a pass. It just didn't make any sense. But let's look at all the other measurements. We did put it through its paces. We did look inside. There are pros and cons, of course, but let's look at the crossover response of this thing, and you can see there's a pretty big dipped area starting about centered about 3100 hertz. There's a big dip there where the drivers just really aren't in phase, and the network that they put on the tweeter just allowed it to step down, and it didn't hold a nice linear response and then drop off. So it just left a hole there where the drivers just are not summing in that region, and again, they're just not in phase very well. It's one of them situations where it's maybe 90 degrees out of phase. So it is what it is. And then when you put the grill on, the grill is pretty thick. It is kind of radiused on the inside edge, kind of not in a rounded radius, but it's flared, which helps. But the grill made it worse. The grill knocked out some of the output and made that hole even deeper. It's almost a 10 dB hole when you put the grill on. So the new measurement in green is the one with the grill on it. If we look at the measurements horizontally and vertically, vertical off axis as we go up, the drivers didn't get any more out of phase, not a lot. And then if you look in the horizontal off axis, things drop off relatively well. The good point about this thing, good news, the spectral decay is fairly clean. If you look at it, you don't see really any stored energy except down low. There's a little bit of stored energy there where there's just such a heavy moving mass. All in all, though, pretty clean. The impedance is very imbalanced. It's high on one side, it's about 10 ohms minimum on one side, and on the tweeter end, it drops to 4.5 ohms. And you can tell by the dipped area there at the bottom, the tuning frequency of those passive radiators is right at 35 hertz. So it may be set up in what we call a reduced base shelf, where the output drops down. It extends really low, but it gives up again sensitivity. So you'd have to put this thing up next to a wall or close to a wall to get some reinforcement down in that lower range to kind of help bring that bottom end up a little bit, because it's definitely going to be down in power. The crossover in this thing, of course, in the whole thing, it's an imported speaker, all made in China. The crossover, obviously made in China. Inexpensive parts, but they were all air core inductors. The caps were what looked like polyester film caps and sandcast resistors. Not the highest end parts, but there were air core inductors in there. The same PVC jacketed wire push-on connectors. The binding posts on this thing had steel nuts on the inside, and it had steel nuts that were sandwiching some eyelets that the wire was attached to. So it had steel parts sandwiching every part of the signal transfer as it comes through the binding post and through the eyelets that it's connected to. So, and yes, steel nuts. Man. And they gold coated them. So they're gold coated to look pretty, but they're steel. It's like, oh, man. So there was a lot of room for improvement in this thing, but in the end, does it make any sense? I mean, you're giving up so much output to gain a little bit of low end extension. It just doesn't make any sense. You could use any other mini monitor and add a subwoofer to it to gain that low end extension, and then you've got flexibility to be able to control the output of that subwoofer to balance it to your main speaker and to balance out your room gain. A lot of times you put a speaker in a room that goes down really low, you may get some room gain or some peaks or things going on, especially if you're thinking, hey, I've got a small room, I'll put a pair of small monitors in there, and these will play down really low. But it may not interact well in your room versus, let's say you had the same monitor, but it rolled off at 60 or 55 hertz or something like that, where you're not as likely to get room gain. And then you bring that subwoofer in and you can adjust the output levels and try and get a nice balanced response. So there's sometimes just much better solutions than going to a speaker that sacrifices that much sensitivity just to gain low end extension. That's it on this one. I know it kind of turned into a little bit of an overview, but I want you guys to keep in mind those principles when you're looking at small speakers. Look at the output capability and make sure that it has a usable range. Anything, 85 dB and up is usually pretty usable. This is way down there in the output. This is, when you get down into the mid to upper 70s, that's pretty low output. You'd need a lot of power just to get it up to reasonable levels. It just doesn't make any sense. That's it for this one. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I know, a short one. And I've got a couple more I've got to shoot. So hang in there. I've got more coming. Thanks for watching, and please hit the subscribe button if you haven't. We'll see you guys in the next one.